The auction block stood silent in the vast hangar of Station Omega-7, where beings from across the galaxy gathered to witness the sale of military assets. Towering Zeltharian warriors with their crystalline armor clinked softly as they moved, while sleek Vorthak merchants floated above the crowd on anti-gravity platforms. The air buzzed with a dozen different languages and the electronic hum of universal translators. At the center of it all stood the Warhorse. Commander Thex of the Galactic Defense Force adjusted his ceremonial sash and cleared his throat. The massive alien's voice boomed across the assembly through the sound amplifiers. Lot number 47, military designation, Thunderstrike, classification, heavy assault warhorse, genetically enhanced for battlefield superiority. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder, its muscles rippling beneath a coat that seemed to shift between deep black and metallic silver. Cybernetic implants gleamed along its neck and legs, and its eyes held an intelligence that made several bidders step back involuntarily. This was no ordinary Earth horse. This was a product of advanced genetic engineering and cybernetic enhancement, designed specifically for war. Thunderstrike served with distinction in the Proxima campaign, Thex continued, reading from his data pad. 17 successful missions, 0 battlefield failures, enhanced strength, speed, and tactical awareness far exceed baseline parameters. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Several hands and appendages rose tentatively, ready to bid. However, Thex's voice took on a disappointed tone. Recent psychological evaluation indicates severe emotional instability. The subject has become difficult to handle. Rejection of multiple handlers, aggressive behavior toward superior officers. Medical analysis suggests deep-seated trauma from combat exposure. The tentative hands lowered. Whispered conversations broke out among the potential buyers. General Kavak of the Draconian Empire, his scales gleaming under the harsh lights, spoke up first. What specific incidents led to this evaluation? Thex consulted his pad again. 3 weeks ago, Thunderstrike refused direct orders during a training exercise. When pressed by Handler Prime Zartok, the animal became violent. It took 4 security teams to contain the situation. Unacceptable, growled Kavak. A war mount that cannot follow orders is worthless. Admiral Kristen, her translucent form shimmering with bioluminescent patterns, added her concern. The crystalline fleet requires absolute obedience from all military assets. This creature's psychological profile indicates fundamental unsuitability for service. More nods of agreement followed. The bidding enthusiasm that had built up moments before evaporated like morning mist. Dr. Zarion, the renowned military animal psychologist, stepped forward from the crowd. His 4 arms gestured expressively as he spoke. I have studied this creature's psychological profile extensively. The trauma runs deep. Combat stress, separation anxiety, and what humans might call post-traumatic stress disorder. In my professional opinion, this animal should be retired from active duty. Then what use is it to us? Demanded Captain Vex of the Mercenary Alliance. We need weapons, not therapy cases. The crowd began to thin. One by one, the major military buyers departed, shaking their heads or muttering about wasted time. The warhorse, sensing the rejection, stamped its feet and whinnied softly. The sound echoed in the growing emptiness of the hangar. Thex looked increasingly uncomfortable. The opening bid stands at 50,000 galactic credits. Any takers? Silence. 40,000? More silence. 30,000 for a fully enhanced war mount with proven combat experience? A few scattered laughs emerged from the remaining crowd. Someone called out, "You couldn't pay me to take that liability." In the back corner of the hangar, almost hidden behind a support pillar, stood a young human woman. Maya Chen had arrived on Station Omega-7 just 3 days earlier, aboard a civilian transport, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and a determination that burned brighter than the station's fusion cores. At 19 years old, she possessed the kind of quiet strength that most beings twice her age never developed. Maya had grown up on a small farming colony where horses weren't weapons or military assets. They were partners, friends, family. She watched Thunderstrike with different eyes than the departing military buyers. Where they saw a broken weapon, she saw a living being in pain. Where they saw liability, she saw potential. Where they saw problems, she saw a creature that needed understanding. The horse's ears twitched constantly, scanning for threats that existed only in traumatic memory. Its stance spoke of hypervigilance, muscles coiled for flight or fight. Maya recognized the signs immediately. She had seen them before in rescue animals back home, creatures that had suffered abuse or abandonment. 20,000! Thex called out, desperation creeping into his voice. Surely someone can use this animal for something. Heavy labor, transport. The cybernetic enhancements alone are worth more than that. Maya stepped forward, her boots echoing in the nearly empty space. 5,000! Every remaining head turned toward her. The massive aliens looked down at the small human female as if she had materialized from thin air. Thex blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, did you say 5,000? Yes, Maya replied calmly, her voice carrying clearly despite her small stature. 5,000 galactic credits. Laughter erupted from several corners of the hangar. A Zeltharian warrior's crystalline armor chimed like broken bells as he shook with mirth. A human child wants to buy a war horse? What will she do? Use it to deliver groceries? Careful, little human, warned Captain Vex, still present to witness the spectacle. That creature could snap you in half without thinking about it. It's killed beings twice your size. Maya didn't flinch. She had faced down charging bulls and spooked stallions back home. Fear was useful, but it shouldn't control decisions. I'm aware of the risks. Dr. Zarion approached her, his multiple arms expressing concern through gestures. Young human, I must advise against this purchase. This animal's psychological profile indicates severe trust issues, aggressive tendencies, and unpredictable behavior patterns. It would require months, possibly years of specialized therapy that you are not equipped to provide. What makes you think I'm not equipped? Maya asked simply. The question hung in the air. The remaining aliens exchanged glances. Here was a human barely out of adolescence, standing in a galactic military auction, calmly discussing the purchase of a dangerous war horse as if she were buying feed supplies. Thex recovered first. The bid stands at 5,000. Any other offers? The silence stretched long enough for everyone to understand that Maya Chen was the only being in the galaxy willing to take responsibility for Thunderstrike. Sold, Thex declared, though his expression suggested he thought the transaction was either an elaborate joke or a tragic mistake. Will you be requiring transport arrangements for your purchase? Maya smiled for the first time since entering the hangar. No, thank you. We'll make our own way. As the crowd dispersed, shaking their heads and muttering about foolish humans, Maya approached Thunderstrike's containment area. The warhorse watched her advance with eyes that held intelligence, pain, and something that might have been hope. She stopped just outside the energy barrier that kept the horse confined. Hello, Thunder, she said softly. I'm Maya. I know you've had a rough time lately. I know everyone thinks you're broken, but I don't see it that way. I see someone who's been hurt and needs a friend. The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. For just a moment, the constant vigilance in its posture softened. Dr. Zarion, still present to witness this unprecedented interaction, made notes on his datapad. Fascinating, he murmured to himself. The creature's stress indicators just decreased by 12%. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out an apple she had saved from the transport's meal service. I brought you something. I know it's not much, but where I come from, horses like apples. She tossed the fruit gently through the barrier's food slot. Thunderstrike sniffed it suspiciously, then took a tentative bite. The flavor seemed to trigger some distant memory, and the horse's eyes softened further. "That's it," Maya whispered. "See? Not everything new has to be scary." Station Security Chief Grex approached with the ownership transfer documents. His reptilian features expressed deep skepticism. "Human, are you certain about this decision? This creature has injured 3 handlers and destroyed 2 containment units. Our insurance doesn't cover stupidity." Maya signed the electronic pad without hesitation. "I'm sure." "What exactly do you plan to do with it?" Grex asked. "Help him heal," Maya replied simply. "Then we'll figure out what comes next together." As the ownership transfer completed, the containment barrier flickered and died. Thunderstrike stood free for the first time in months. No energy walls, no restraints, no guards pointing weapons in his direction. Every being in the hangar tensed, expecting the worst. Instead, the warhorse took one careful step toward Maya, then another. His massive head lowered until he was nearly at her eye level. For a long moment, human and horse regarded each other in perfect stillness. Maya slowly extended her hand, palm up, letting Thunderstrike make the choice. After what felt like an eternity, the horse gently touched his muzzle to her palm. "Well," Dr. Zarian said to no one in particular, "that's definitely not in any of my psychological profiles." Maya smiled and gently stroked the horse's neck, careful to avoid the cybernetic implants. "Ready to go home, Thunder? We've got a long journey ahead of us." As the unlikely pair walked toward the departure bay, every being in the hangar watched in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic military history: a broken warhorse choosing to trust again. What none of them realized was that they had also witnessed the beginning of something that would reshape their understanding of both humans and the bonds that could exist between species. The rejected warhorse and the human girl who saw his potential were about to embark on an adventure that would prove the galaxy's military experts wrong in ways they never could have imagined. The universe was about to learn what humans had always known. Sometimes the broken things, when treated with patience and love, become the strongest of all. 6 months had passed since Maya Chen and Thunderstrike left Station Omega 7, and the galaxy had forgotten about both of them. Military commanders moved on to other concerns. Dr. Zarian published papers about animal psychology, and the war machine continued its relentless march across the stars. On the remote agricultural world of Kepler 438b, however, something extraordinary was taking place. Maya had used most of her savings to secure a small homestead on the planet's temperate continent. The world was officially classified as a minor agricultural colony, which meant the Galactic Council largely ignored it. Perfect for a young woman who wanted to heal a traumatized warhorse away from prying eyes and military oversight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pasture where Thunderstrike grazed peacefully. His cybernetic implants caught the light, but his posture spoke of contentment rather than the hypervigilance that had defined his final military days. The constant tension in his muscles had relaxed. His ears no longer swiveled frantically at every sound. Maya emerged from the small farmhouse carrying a bucket of specially formulated feed and a thermos of coffee. She had learned to adjust Thunderstrike's nutrition to account for his enhanced metabolism and cybernetic energy requirements. It had taken months of research and trial and error, but the results spoke for themselves. "Good morning, Thunder," she called out cheerfully. "Ready for breakfast?" The warhorse lifted his head and nickered softly, a sound that would have amazed his former handlers. During his military service, Thunderstrike had been silent, except for the occasional aggressive scream during combat situations. Now he had rediscovered the simple pleasure of greeting someone he trusted. As Maya approached, she noticed something that still amazed her after all these months. Thunderstrike's eyes were calm. Not vacant or drugged, but genuinely at peace. The constant fear and anger that had characterized his military psychological profile had been replaced by something the military experts had insisted was impossible: happiness. "The Collins family is coming by today," Maya said as she poured the feed into Thunder's trough. "Remember them? They visited last week with their little girl who was too shy to say hello." Thunderstrike's ears perked up at the mention of visitors. Over the past few months, Maya had carefully introduced him to a select few neighbors. Initially, she had been terrified that his combat training would activate around strangers, but the opposite had occurred. Away from military environments and expectations, Thunderstrike seemed genuinely curious about meeting new people. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. The first month had been filled with challenges that would have broken most people's resolve. Thunderstrike had suffered from severe nightmares, often waking the entire valley with his distressed calls. His cybernetic implants occasionally malfunctioned, causing him to relive combat scenarios that existed only in traumatic memory. Maya had dealt with each crisis with patience and determination. When thunderstorms triggered his combat stress responses, she stayed with him all night, talking softly until the memories faded. When his implants glitched, she learned basic cybernetic maintenance to provide temporary relief until they could reach the nearest qualified technician. Most importantly, she had given him choices. For the first time in his enhanced life, Thunderstrike could decide where to go, what to eat, when to run, and when to rest. The simple act of autonomy had proven more therapeutic than any medical intervention. Around midday, the Collins family arrived in their aging hover truck. John Collins was a weathered farmer who had initially been skeptical about having a military monster in the neighborhood. His wife, Sarah, had been more optimistic but cautious. Their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had been absolutely terrified. Today, however, Emma practically bounced out of the vehicle. "Maya! Maya! Can I show Thunder the drawings I made?" The transformation in the child's attitude perfectly mirrored Thunderstrike's own journey. What had begun as mutual fear had evolved into genuine affection. Maya grinned and waved to the family. "He's been looking forward to seeing you all day." Emma ran toward the pasture where Thunderstrike stood waiting. The massive warhorse, capable of crushing armored vehicles and trained to kill enemies of the state, lowered his great head so that a small girl could pet his nose. "Look what I made, Thunder!" Emma held up a crayon drawing that depicted a girl and a horse running through flowers under a rainbow. "It's you and me being friends." Thunderstrike examined the artwork with the same focused attention he had once given to tactical briefings. Then, very gently, he nuzzled the paper and nickered his approval. John Collins shook his head in amazement. "Maya, I have to admit, when you first moved here with that creature, I thought you were either crazy or suicidal. Probably both." "And now?" Maya asked with a smile. "Now I'm starting to think the military boys were the crazy ones for letting him go." Sarah Collins nodded in agreement. "Emma talks about Thunder constantly. She's even drawn pictures of him for show and tell at school." As if summoned by the mention of school, a sleek government hover car appeared on the horizon, approaching the homestead at official speeds. Maya felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She had been expecting this visit for months. The vehicle landed in the farmyard with bureaucratic precision. 3 beings emerged. Commander Thex from the original auction, Dr. Zerion with his multiple arms full of monitoring equipment, and a new figure Maya didn't recognize. A tall, imposing Valdorian wearing the insignia of the Galactic Military Assessment Division. "Miss Chen," Commander Thex called out formally. I am Colonel Vrak of Military Assessment. We're here to conduct a mandatory follow-up evaluation of your purchase. Maya had prepared for this moment. Of course, Colonel. What do you need to know? Dr. Zarion was already scanning Thunderstrike with various medical devices. Fascinating, he murmured. Stress hormone levels have decreased by 73%. Cybernetic integration shows optimal functionality. Neural activity patterns suggest contentment? The last word came out as a question, as if Dr. Zarion couldn't quite believe his own readings. Colonel Vrak studied Thunderstrike with calculating eyes. We've received reports that this animal has been socialized. Is it true that local civilians have been in direct contact with a classified military asset? Thunder isn't classified anymore, Maya replied calmly. I bought him at public auction. He's a civilian now. The cybernetic enhancements remain classified technology, Vrak countered. Furthermore, our psychological profile indicated this creature was unsuitable for civilian life. We need to verify that public safety hasn't been compromised. Emma Collins, still standing next to Thunderstrike, looked up at the imposing military officers with innocent curiosity. Are you here to visit Thunder too? He likes visitors, but you have to be nice to him. The three military officials stared at the child in stunned silence. Here was an 8-year-old human casually interacting with what they still considered a dangerous weapon. Child, Dr. Zarion said carefully, has the creature ever shown aggressive behavior in your presence? Emma giggled. Thunder? He's not mean. He's silly sometimes. Watch this! She pulled another crayon from her pocket and pretended to draw in the air. Thunderstrike immediately lowered his head and gently posed for his imaginary portrait. Colonel Vrak's expression shifted from official skepticism to genuine confusion. This behavior is unprecedented. Thunder learns new games all the time, Emma continued proudly. Maya taught him to play hide-and-seek, and last week we taught him to dance. Dance? Thex repeated weakly. Want to see? Emma asked excitedly. Before anyone could object, the little girl began humming a simple tune and moving in a basic rhythm. Thunderstrike, without any commands or coercion, began stepping in time with the music, his massive form moving with surprising grace. Dr. Zarion's equipment began registering readings that contradicted everything in his theoretical framework. Colonel, he said quietly, according to my scans, the creature is experiencing what can only be described as joy. Maya stepped forward. Would you like to see what else Thunder has learned? Over the next hour, Maya demonstrated the remarkable changes in Thunderstrike's behavior. He responded to voice commands given as polite requests rather than military orders. He showed problem-solving abilities that had been suppressed during his military service. Most impressively, he demonstrated an emotional intelligence that military trainers had actively discouraged. In military service, emotional responses were considered weaknesses to be eliminated, Maya explained. But Thunder isn't a weapon anymore. He's allowed to feel things. And when you let someone heal from trauma instead of just managing it, amazing things become possible. Colonel Vrak was taking detailed notes. Miss Chen, I must ask, what exactly have you been doing with this animal? Our records show continuous cybernetic monitoring, but the behavioral changes are beyond what our experts deemed possible. Maya smiled. I treated him like a person instead of equipment. I gave him choices instead of orders. I addressed his trauma instead of punishing him for it. Basically, I did what humans have always done with horses. I became his partner instead of his master. The military officials exchanged glances loaded with implications Maya was just beginning to understand. Miss Chen, Colonel Vrak said slowly, would you be willing to document your methods? The Galactic Military Council is interested in your results. Before Maya could answer, alarms began sounding across the valley. Emergency broadcasts crackled from the hovercar's communication system. All units, all units. Hostile forces have breached the Kepler system defense perimeter. Estimated time to planetary assault, 4 hours. All civilians advised to evacuate immediately. The peaceful afternoon shattered like glass. Military protocols kicked in automatically as Colonel Vrack coordinated with orbital defenses. The Collins family gathered their daughter protectively. "Maya!" Sarah Collins called out, fear evident in her voice. "The evacuation shuttles will be here within the hour. Pack only essentials." But Maya was looking at Thunderstrike, and Thunderstrike was looking back at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not fear or trauma, but something else entirely. Recognition. Purpose. The Warhorse's cybernetic implants began glowing more brightly as dormant systems activated in response to the military emergency broadcasts. But instead of the uncontrolled aggression that had characterized his previous combat stress responses, Thunderstrike remained calm and focused. He stepped closer to Maya and nickeled softly, as if asking a question only she could understand. Maya placed her hand on his neck and felt the subtle vibrations of his cybernetic systems coming online. "I know, Thunder. I know you remember what those alarms mean, but the choice is yours now. You don't have to fight anymore if you don't want to." The Warhorse looked toward the horizon, where the first signs of orbital bombardment were beginning to appear as distant flashes of light. Then he looked back at Maya, at Emma Collins, who was clutching her drawings, at the small community that had become his home. When Thunderstrike's response came, it wasn't the mindless aggression of a programmed weapon. It was the calculated determination of someone choosing to protect what mattered to him. For the first time since leaving the military, Thunderstrike reared up and screamed his challenge to the sky. But this wasn't the broken cry of a traumatized veteran. This was the roar of a guardian who had found something worth protecting. The galaxy's rejected Warhorse was about to remind everyone why he had been considered the best of his kind. The only difference now was that he was fighting by choice, not by compulsion, and that difference would change everything. The invasion fleet appeared in Kepler 438b's sky like a swarm of metallic insects, their ships blotting out sections of the afternoon sun. The attacking force belonged to the hegemony of Carthax, a militant alliance known for enslaving agricultural worlds and harvesting their populations for labor camps. Colonel Vrack's communication device crackled with increasingly desperate reports from orbital defense platforms. "Sir, we're outnumbered 12-1. Primary defense grid is failing. Estimated time before atmospheric penetration, 90 minutes. Maya watched the evacuation shuttles landing in nearby fields, their pilots shouting for civilians to board immediately. The Collins family was already running toward the nearest transport, John carrying Emma while Sarah clutched the girl's drawings of Thunderstrike. "Maya!" Sarah called back. "Come on! There's still space!" But Maya remained beside Thunderstrike, her hand resting on his neck where she could feel the subtle humming of his awakening combat systems. The Warhorse stood perfectly still, his enhanced senses analyzing the approaching threat with mechanical precision. "Miss Chen," Dr. Zarion approached cautiously, his multiple arms gesturing urgently. "You must evacuate immediately. When the hegemony forces land, they will not discriminate between combatants and civilians." "I know," Maya replied quietly, her eyes never leaving the horizon where the first atmospheric entry burns were becoming visible. Colonel Vrack studied her expression with growing understanding. "You're not leaving, are you?" "This is Thunder's home now," Maya said simply. "Someone has to stay and defend it. Miss Chen, with all due respect, you're a 19-year-old human civilian with no military training. One enhanced Warhorse cannot stand against an invasion force of 10,000 hegemony shock troops." Maya smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and fierce. "Colonel, with all due respect, You've never seen what happens when someone fights to protect their family instead of following orders. Thunderstrike turned his massive head toward Maya, their eyes meeting in perfect understanding. The question he had asked earlier with that gentle nickel was now answered. He would fight, not because he had to, but because he chose to, and Maya would stand with him. "Thunder," Maya said softly, "remember everything they taught you, but fight your way this time." The warhorse's response was immediate and dramatic. His cybernetic implants flared to full power, casting brilliant blue light across the farmyard. Enhanced muscles tensed with controlled energy. Advanced targeting systems came online, painting the sky with invisible sensor beams that began tracking incoming hostiles. But most remarkably, Thunderstrike remained emotionally stable. The panic and trauma responses that had characterized his final military service were completely absent. Instead, he exhibited a calm determination that impressed even Colonel Vrak. "Fascinating," Dr. Zarian muttered, still scanning with his equipment. "All combat systems at full readiness, but stress indicators remain at baseline levels. This should be impossible." The first hegemony drop pods screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars, their heat trails carving burning paths across the sky. Maya counted at least 30 pods heading toward their valley alone. "Maya! Thunder! Get inside the bunker!" Colonel Vrak shouted, pointing toward an emergency shelter that had materialized from the government hover car. "We'll coordinate defensive positions from—" He never finished the sentence. Thunderstrike had moved. The warhorse accelerated from standing still to full combat speed in less than 2 seconds, his enhanced legs carrying him across the pasture like a living missile. Maya, who had been standing beside him, found herself swept up and seated on his back in one fluid motion. For a moment, terror overwhelmed her. This was nothing like the gentle rides they had shared during his recovery. This was Thunderstrike in full combat mode, and she was an untrained civilian on the back of a guided weapon, moving at speeds that made the landscape blur. But then she felt something unexpected. Thunder's awareness of her presence. His movements, while devastating in their efficiency, were carefully calibrated to keep her safe. He was protecting her, even as he prepared to engage the enemy. The first hegemony drop pod crashed into the far end of the valley, disgorging a squad of heavily armored insectoid warriors. Their plasma rifles began charging with ominous whines, and their commanding officer was already barking orders in their clicking language. They never had a chance to fire. Thunderstrike hit the squad like a natural disaster. His enhanced hooves shattered combat armor designed to stop military-grade weapons. His tactical intelligence allowed him to anticipate enemy movements with perfect precision. Most importantly, his emotional stability meant he could execute complex maneuvers without the berserker rage that had characterized his previous combat trauma. Maya found herself in the middle of a battle, but Thunder moved with such calculated grace that she felt strangely safe. He positioned himself to use enemy cover, struck with minimal necessary force, and maintained constant awareness of civilian evacuation routes. "This is impossible," Dr. Zarian breathed, watching the engagement through his monitoring equipment. His combat efficiency has increased by over 200% from his military profile. More drop pods landed throughout the valley. Hegemony forces began coordinating their assault, expecting easy victory over agricultural civilians. Instead, they encountered something none of their tactical databases had prepared them for: a warhorse fighting by choice rather than compulsion. Thunderstrike moved through enemy positions like liquid lightning. Maya learned to lean with his movements, to trust his balance, to become part of his awareness rather than a burden he carried. Together, they disrupted 3 separate landing zones before the hegemony commanders realized they were facing unprecedented opposition. "All units, priority target identified," crackled over captured enemy communications. "Enhanced equine asset with human rider. Eliminate immediately." The enemy response was swift and overwhelming. plasma artillery opened fire from multiple positions. Combat drones swarmed toward their location. A full company of hegemony shock troops began advancing with coordinated precision. Maya felt Thunderstrike tense beneath her as his sensors calculated the impossible odds. For a moment, she wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Then she remembered something important. "Thunder!" she called out over the sound of incoming fire. "We're not alone!" The war horse's ears flicked toward her voice, and suddenly Maya felt his awareness expand beyond immediate tactical concerns. They weren't just fighting for themselves or even for their home. They were fighting for Emma Collins and her drawings, for John and Sarah who had learned to trust them, for Dr. Zerion, whose scientific theories were being rewritten, for every being who had witnessed that a broken weapon could become a choosing guardian. Thunderstrike's response was magnificent. Instead of engaging the superior enemy force directly, he began a running battle that drew them away from civilian evacuation routes. He used his speed and intelligence to turn the valley's terrain into a weapon, leading enemy units into natural kill zones and tactical traps. Maya found herself becoming more than a passenger. Her human intuition began complementing Thunder's tactical processing. She spotted threats his sensors missed, suggested routes his programming hadn't considered, provided the emotional intelligence that pure combat training couldn't replicate. "Maya!" Colonel Vrack's voice crackled through her emergency communicator. "Orbital reinforcements are inbound, but they won't arrive for another hour. Can you maintain your position?" Maya looked around at the chaos of battle, at the dozens of enemy units converging on their location, at the impossible odds they faced. Then she felt Thunderstrike's steady heartbeat beneath her legs and knew the answer. "We're not maintaining position, Colonel," she replied with calm confidence. "We're winning." What followed became legend throughout the galaxy. A 19-year-old human girl and a rejected warhorse fought a running battle against an entire invasion force, not with mindless aggression, but with intelligence, creativity, and unbreakable trust. Thunderstrike learned to fight in ways his military training had never allowed. Instead of following predetermined tactical protocols, he improvised constantly. He used civilian infrastructure as cover, turned farming equipment into weapons, and employed psychological warfare that confused enemy commanders accustomed to predictable military responses. Maya discovered abilities she never knew she possessed. Her intuitive understanding of Thunder's capabilities allowed her to suggest tactics that maximized his strengths. Her human empathy let her predict enemy behavior patterns that pure logic missed. Most importantly, her unwavering trust gave Thunderstrike the emotional foundation he needed to exceed every limitation his designers had built into him. Together, they didn't just delay the invasion, they began systematically dismantling it. Enemy units found their communications disrupted as Thunder learned to target their coordination nodes. Supply lines collapsed when he struck at precisely calculated intervals. Morale crumbled as reports spread of a single human horse team defeating entire companies. When the Galactic Defense Force reinforcements finally arrived, they expected to find survivors hiding in emergency shelters. Instead, they discovered Maya and Thunderstrike standing in a field of defeated enemies, neither of them seriously injured, both of them somehow still radiating the calm determination that had carried them through the impossible battle. Colonel Vrack approached them with something approaching reverence. "Miss Chen, what you and Thunderstrike accomplished today, it changes everything we thought we knew about military psychology, tactical doctrine, and the nature of combat effectiveness itself." Maya slid down from Thunder's back and hugged his neck. Feeling the gentle return of his peaceful demeanor as his combat systems powered down. "You want to know the secret, Colonel?" "Please." "Thunder wasn't fighting like a weapon today. He was fighting like someone who chose to protect his family. That's not something you can program or train or force. That's something that only happens when you treat warriors like people instead of equipment." Dr. Xerion, who had monitored the entire battle, stepped forward with data pads full of readings that contradicted decades of military science. Miss Chen, the Galactic Military Council is going to want to study what happened here today. Your methods could revolutionize how we approach military psychology, combat training, and veteran rehabilitation. Maya looked around the valley that was still her home, still Thunder's peaceful pasture, despite the battle that had just ended. In the distance, she could see the Collins family returning from the evacuation shuttles, Emma clutching her drawings and running toward Thunder with absolute trust. "Then I guess we'd better teach them properly," Maya said with a smile. "But they'll have to understand, this isn't about making better weapons. This is about helping warriors remember that they're people who chose to fight for something worth protecting." Thunderstrike nickered softly and nuzzled Maya's shoulder, a gesture of affection that would have been impossible during his military service. Around them, Galactic Defense Force officers began realizing that they weren't just witnessing the end of a battle, but the beginning of a revolution in how the galaxy understood the relationship between duty, choice, and the unbreakable bond between those who fight together by choice rather than compulsion. The rejected warhorse and the human girl had proven something that would echo through military academies and veteran rehabilitation centers across the galaxy. Sometimes the broken things, when healed with patience and love, don't just become whole again. They become extraordinary, and the universe would never be quite the same.